Hey, what's going on, ladies and gents? How you people doing here? So let's talk about the new WWE and UFC merger. That's right. And as somebody who used to be a big professional wrestling fan, because as you guys know, when I was growing up, I was a big fan of WWE. Like, I would watch that stuff every Monday night, every Tuesday night, and every Friday night. Because Monday it was Raw, Tuesday it was ECW, and Friday it was SmackDown. And that's the WWE that I grew up. And not gonna lie, I'd be lying if I said I don't miss that era of wrestling and or the Attitude Era as well, because if there is one era that I absolutely loved about wrestling that I really would love to relive again and re-witness again, it would without a doubt have to be the Attitude Era, because that's really what made watching wrestling very fun, and that's, in my opinion, what made wrestling mainstream and what made so many people interested in wrestling. And I feel like these last 10 years with WWE, I just lost interest in it. But I recently just read the news, that WWE and UFC are merging together. And in my honest opinion, I wonder what this is going to mean, because obviously I read that it's somewhere in the value of a $21 billion budget, which is a crap ton. And I just think that right now, what this will mean for wrestling, I have no idea, because I guess now this means that Triple H's role is going to be diminished more now that Vince McMahon came back, because as you guys know, there was that whole scandal, I guess that whole what was it about, like some sort of sexual harassment scandal involving Vince McMahon or something, because obviously, knowing Vince McMahon, he's been involved in a lot of, sexual, I guess, harassment or a lot of sexual lawsuits and all that. And obviously there was that big thing involving him, and he stepped away from wrestling because of all the, I guess, sexual misconduct allegations. And now that Vince McMahon's back, I really wonder what this is going to mean for professional wrestling. Are people going to get a good product, or are they going to get a crappy product? Because not gonna lie, ever since they got rid of ECW and replaced it, for example, with NXT in 2010, I really stopped following WWE since they got rid of ECW, and especially the Attitude Era, because what's really made wrestling interesting in the first place would have to be WCW, ECW, WWF, World Wrestling Federation. Because back then, WWE, for all the younger generations that don't know, there used to be before WWE, there was World Wrestling Federation, and I did watch a lot of the reruns from it, because I never watched any WWF event live, just because I was too young back then. But on my days on YouTube, I would sometimes spend time watching old WWE videos just for a little nostalgia trip. And this really made me realize just how incredible wrestling was, And when it comes to who I think was the greatest Attitude Era performer, I would honestly have to say Kane. Like, out of all the wrestlers, well, there's also, I would say Goldberg, Booker T, and, those top three wrestlers that I've mentioned, I would have to say Kane. I think Kane was the greatest wrestler from the Attitude Era, but there's also a lot of other wrestlers like Kevin Nash. There's also Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall. There's also, who else? I'm trying to think of a name, but there's just so many great wrestlers from the Attitude Era that the only time when I would be fully interested in watching professional wrestling again is if they brought back the Attitude Era or WCW or ECW, because that's the type of stuff that I grew up around, especially ECW. I still remember Tommy Dreamer and Sabu. And speaking of ECW, personally, me, for ECW, my favorite wrestler would have to be Sabu. Just Sabu for ECW was just an absolute legend, and I still remember all the crazy high-flying stuff that Sabu did. That's really what I liked about ECW, was just the intensity, and that's really what I miss about wrestling, was just that era of intensity, just the era where you could basically watch it and be entertained, not like now, where wrestling has just become strictly a kid's show. Like, who's gonna watch that stuff? Unless, of course, you're a little kid, who the heck is going to be interested in that stuff? Because that stuff that they now show in wrestling, it just doesn't interest me at all. And that's the reason why I quit watching WWE almost a decade ago, just because I grew out of it, and the product has just really become a crap show, because just the WWE that I used to watch, it just doesn't simply exist anymore. And that's the reason why I simply haven't watched professional wrestling in a hot minute. But that's just me, because ever since they just, started making WWE a PG/kids show, I just lost interest in that, because it's then the only only audience that wrestling is going to appeal to are the little kids and not everybody else, because obviously, for example, with WWF, WCW, ECW, it appealed to adults, and that's what they should also focus on. Wrestling is, you know, just have like a separate program for like a separate, or I guess like a separate show for the kids and a separate show for the adults. That's what they should do with professional wrestling, and maybe it would get more people interested in professional wrestling. But right now, you know, I'll be honest, I just haven't been interested in professional wrestling at all. Like, the storylines just don't really interest me anymore like how they used to. Maybe that's just me, but goddamn, as somebody who is an old school professional wrestling fan, I really wish we could go back to the days of WWF, ECW, WCW, Raw is War, because that's really what was the true foundation, and or that's really what made professional wrestling interesting, in my opinion. So that's pretty much my honest opinion on this. But yeah, WWE and UFC are merging together.